The crisp evening air of New York City carried a blend of honking horns, distant chatter, and the occasional burst of laughter from pedestrians enjoying a night out. Marcus had just finished a long day at work and stood on the corner of Fifth Avenue, hailing a taxi to take him home. He was tired, his muscles ached, and all he wanted was to sink into the worn-out cushions of a cab and let the city blur past him until he reached his apartment. Several yellow taxis zoomed past without slowing, and Marcus sighed. He checked his phone. 10:47 p.m. He was used to the long waits, the occasional hesitance from cab drivers, and the moments of invisibility when his outstretched hand seemed not to exist. Tonight was no different. Finally, a taxi slowed down. The driver, an older man with graying hair and a stern expression, eyed Marcus through the rearview mirror before hesitantly unlocking the doors. Marcus climbed in, sighing with relief. "Brooklyn," he said, giving the address. The driver, whose name tag read Stanley, didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at Marcus through the mirror, his lips pressed together. "You got cash?" he asked. Marcus frowned. "I can pay with card." Stanley scoffed. "Card machine's broken." Marcus had encountered this excuse before. He pulled out a $20 bill from his wallet and held it up. "I got cash." With a grunt, Stanley put the car into drive and pulled away from the curb. Silence filled the space between them. The city lights reflected off the windshield, illuminating Stanley's face. A face marked by the years, but hardened by something else. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his temples. The exhaustion of the day weighed on him, but there was also an unease growing in his stomach. He had dealt with people like Stanley before, those who saw his skin before they saw him. But what choice did he have? He just wanted to get home. A few blocks passed before Stanley muttered under his breath. Marcus wasn't sure he heard it right. "Sorry, what was that?" he asked. Stanley kept his eyes on the road. "Just saying, Brooklyn ain't what it used to be. Lot of crime these days." Marcus exhaled slowly. He had a feeling where this was going. "Brooklyn's got good and bad, like anywhere." Stanley scoffed again. "Yeah, well, some parts worse than others. You live there?" Marcus turned his gaze to the window. "Yeah." Stanley let out a chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "Figures." A tightness settled in Marcus's chest. He had two options: ignore it and get home in peace, or confront it and risk making things worse. He chose silence, staring at the passing buildings, counting the minutes until he could leave this car. But Stanley wasn't done. "Used to be safe, you know," the driver continued, "before they let just anyone in." Marcus turned to face him now. "Anyone?" Stanley shrugged. "You know what I mean." The words hung in the air like thick smoke. Marcus felt his fingers tighten into a fist, but he forced himself to unclench them. He had been through this before. The microaggressions, the not-so-subtle racism, disguised as nostalgia for a time that never existed. He had learned to pick his battles. But tonight, something in him refused to let it slide. "Tell me, Stanley," Marcus said, voice even. "What exactly do you mean?" Stanley's grip on the wheel tightened. "Nothing. Just saying things change. Not always for the better." Marcus nodded slowly. "Right. And I guess you decide what's better?" The taxi driver didn't answer. The hum of the engine and the distant wail of a siren filled the void between them. Marcus exhaled sharply and looked out the window again. He told himself to let it go, to just get home. The ride continued in thick silence. Every streetlight cast a different shadow on Stanley's face, highlighting the creases of time, the weight of beliefs carried for years. Marcus wondered about him, how he got here, what made him the way he was. Hatred was never born, it was taught, passed down like an heirloom from those who feared change. Finally, they reached Marcus's apartment. The car slowed to a stop, and Stanley turned to look at him, waiting for the money. Marcus handed him the $20 bill, but he didn't move to leave just yet. He met Stanley's gaze, holding it steady. "You know," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm, "you might want to think about the people you pick up every day. The ones you assume things about, the ones you think don't belong." Stanley's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Because one day," Marcus continued, "you might realize the problem isn't who's getting into your taxi. It's the man driving it." With that, Marcus opened the door, stepped out, and shut it behind him. He didn't look back as the taxi pulled away, disappearing into the night. As Marcus walked up the steps to his building, he thought about all the other nights like this one, all the other times he had been made to feel like he was intruding in his own city, his own home. But he wasn't going anywhere. He belonged. He entered his apartment, locking the door behind him. The weight of the night settled over him, but he refused to let it linger. He knew there would be other Stanleys in the world, more obstacles, more moments of doubt. But he also knew something else. His existence was not an apology. Somewhere, in a city that never slept, another man was standing on a corner, trying to hail a cab, facing the same silent battle. And Marcus hoped that when that man entered his own taxi, he too would remember. He belonged, no matter who tried to tell him otherwise.